Well, hi, everybody. I'm Ken Viberai, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business, politics, and today, longevity. Now, 25 years ago, Jesse, when we were hanging out up in Boston, you were my boss because I was doing my master's thesis at the Kennedy School for you on civic engagement and young people. And if you told me 25 years later, you'd be running a longevity company and I'd be drinking, coffee virtually, I don't know what I would have said, but great to see you, man.
Yeah, you too.
It's one of those things where it's just like funny in life. And my favorite part of this whole series is being able to come back and have people like you that I've had like a relationship with for so many years and be able to kind of like pause, do a proper catch up, and, share it with thousands of people so they can see what you're up to as well, Jesse. So why don't we start with kind of like the origin story a little bit, right? We were both up in Cambridge and you were working a nonprofit, but then you quickly went off to business school, ran companies, started companies. What was all that like? And then how did you get into the longevity space?
I've actually been into health and wellness my whole life. Since I was a kid, I knew that I had a family history of heart disease. Most of the men in my family had heart attack before the age of 50, and that just had me really motivated to be healthy. And so, actually, I ran 3 marathons. I ran the Boston Marathon. That was the first one I ran in 2002. I did CrossFit for 10 years. I tried every diet out there, from paleo, vegan, pegan, juice cleanse. I did a diet where I only ate apples for 5 days, but I wasn't following the science. I was just doing like what I thought, was going to be healthy. And a few years ago, I found my way to the longevity space. I actually found Peter Attia and his podcast. This was before his book came out. And it just spoke to me as something that I wanted to do in my own life. I never worked in healthcare. I had been in fintech for 13 years. I went to business school after a nonprofit, and then I worked at BCG, and then I was in fintech for 13 years. But been into the space, and so I, was interested in what he was talking about, and I got deeper into it. But I got confused because he says one thing, and then Huberman says something else, and David Sinclair says something, and Rhonda Patrick and Brian Johnson and all these different luminaries, they're all saying different things. And I'm trying to figure out what to do. So I went to my doctor and I asked her, how do we sort of sort through all this? And she was just really dismissive, like, oh, those longevity hacks, they're not evidence based. They're just out to make a buck. And I was like, well, some of this stuff really makes sense. And so I started looking around at other, for like a longevity medical practice, concierge practice. And I was a little shocked that there wasn't much out there. And what there was very expensive, like over $100,000 a year, and mostly biased. So, you just got to do these peptides or do this stem cell, and that's going to be the solution for you, versus like looking at the individual person and trying to help somebody understand, they're based on their own biomarkers and their biology and genetics and interests and lifestyle, like what's going to be right for you. And so I didn't find what I wanted. So I started it myself. I teamed up with a doctor and we launched Longevity Health, which is a combination of a longevity executive physical where we do a bunch of testing and screening, and a concierge medical practice focused on longevity.
Yeah, because you referenced Peter T. I got his book too, and this kind of what else helped motivate me, right? Like I'm going through it, roughly a similar age. I think we both have 3 kids, a dog. I got you beat the bearded dragon, but like I've
It's,
you got 15 chickens. That's right. I forgot. 15 or are you eating them? I can't.
yeah. We had 15. I think it's 13 now. So they don't last that long.
But it's one of these things where you're an inspiration to me because I feel like whether it's Instagram targeted or on Twitter, it's like you're constantly kind of being softly exposed to like, hey, do this or do this diet or only go to the gym 3 days a week and stop cardio and you'll live 100 years if you eat like 30 grams of bison meat a day or so, right? Like it is confusing. It's hard to kind of develop like a strategy, right? So like talk a little bit about your research, right? Because even when we talked a couple of years ago, you were just getting into this, right? I remember you were crowdsourcing. You were like, what are some cool doctors or what are you thinking about? Which I love about how you've approached things because it was almost from a practical kind of tap the network first and then dive into the science.
Yeah, so I think exactly what you're saying is the challenge that exists today, which is that most of the stuff out there is sort of generic advice telling you what to do. Yeah, do this diet, take these supplements, do this exercise protocol, like come to my clinic and I'll sell you this thing, right? But actually, what you and I should do is different,
Hmm.
right? And I found that is true in so many different scenarios. It's true with diet, true with exercise. It's true with supplements. It's true with medication. It's true with, even the diagnostics that you're doing and the testing that you're doing. There is no one size fits all. And so the way that we approach it is we start with why. Why do you even want to live longer and healthier? I mean, it may seem obvious, but developing your own personal why actually can be really impactful. And so for me, I want to ski in my 80s.
Yeah.
I want to hike uphill in my 90s, and I want to live to 102 to meet my great grandchildren if I have any. And I want to be active and be able to be on the ground and playing with them. So articulating that actually helps. And then you want to get into the how. How are you going to achieve that goal? Right. And how, for most people, is don't get a chronic disease, what Peter Attia calls the four horsemen: heart disease, dementia, diabetes, and cancer, and maintain and improve your mental, physical, and emotional well being. And if you can do those two things, then you're going to live a long and healthy life. And so then you develop a plan, a specific and targeted plan to achieve those goals, right? So I have a strategy to avoid getting heart disease. As I mentioned, I have this family history. And so that was something I was really worried about. We did a bunch of testing. I get, my ApoB and my LP(a) tested. I do cardiac imaging to see if I have the beginnings of heart disease. I have a diet sort of focused around that. So, I have this whole strategy of what are the things that I need to do. And then I reevaluate it every few months. And that then leads to what, right? So you get to the what based on your goals, and then your plan and your strategy.
Which in business you would do easily, right? With like anything else. But for thinking about your own well being, most people don't do that, right? Like I try to be healthy, eat well, maintain a certain kind of lifestyle, but at the same time, I don't have a proper plan, right? Like I had my little midlife crisis last year where I did like a half Ironman, right? And it was amazing, right? Like just the idea of getting out there swimming and biking and doing things. But then it's kind of like this year I'm trying to, make up for it, but it's not in a coherent way. So you're sitting here and you're like, not only do people want to live longer and take care of themselves and have better quality of life, but then you help putting together the plan, right? So that's where, like, tell us about your team and how it's been going on, getting it set up.
And I would say, just sort of take a step back. You're absolutely right that most people don't do this with their health, which arguably is the most important thing, right? I was in fintech, in consumer finance for 13 years. And it's sort of like if instead of developing a financial plan to help you retire at 65, you go on TikTok and you get some hot stock tip and you're like, I don't need a plan because, I got this stock. It's going to be huge, right? And it just doesn't work that way with your health. And, we can't rely on our medical system to do that. And so that's really the genesis of longevity health. And so the way we help people figure out sort of what's going to be right for them is first, we do a base level of testing. And so the four tests that, we think most people should get: first, really extensive blood work, which most people have had some blood work, but, we have a more extensive panel. And then a DEXA scan, which looks at your visceral fat, your bone density, your muscle mass. It's your body composition, right? So you lay down, you get a scan, it takes about 10 minutes. And that's really valuable because the thing is that, you really want to optimize your body composition, but you and I, we may sort of look the same on the outside, but we don't know what's on the inside, right? Yeah. And so there's no way to know, you can have two people, both who have 20% body fat, for example. One might have half a pound of visceral fat. The other might have 2 pounds, 4x difference, or, sort of the same. And that's just based on your genetics and your lifestyle and things that, you can't really see. So we do the DEXA scan. Then we do a VO2 max test. So I think Peter talks about this in his book as, it's probably one of the top biomarkers out there. Since, you're a triathlete, yours might be very strong, but we don't know until we test it. And so like when I did my VO2 max, I've run 3 marathons. I thought I was in pretty good shape. I was doing CrossFit. It was like slightly above average. And when I did the math on like, where does it need to be so that I can be hiking uphill in my 90s? Well, it need to be a lot higher. So I had to shift my training with way more specificity to achieve my goals, right? And then we do a continuous glucose monitor because 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. And so because of that, we really want to, sort of make sure that you're in the 7%. And so we do the continuous glucose monitor. You do all that testing. And then we want to pick like what are the one or two most important things for Ken, right? It might be metabolic health, it might be heart health, it might be VO2 max, it might be bone density. I don't know what the answer is until you actually do the work. And that becomes really critical then to pick those top things. I think what happens is, people like you and me, we want to do everything, right? And it's like, oh, there's 7 things here. I need to do all of them. But longevity is a lifelong journey. And so picking one or two of the most important things to focus on and doing that first makes a huge difference. And then you can retest, 3 to 6 months later, you can change the focus, move from one thing to the other to the other. But having that focus becomes really impactful. And then once you get that focus, then you can get into the specific interventions of what. What do you now need to do to improve your VO2 max, for example?
So tell us a little bit about what you've learned about the American healthcare system as a result of spending more time in this, right? Like, and I think Peter talks a little bit about it, right? Like the way we kind of exist is, people used to just live like this and then they would kind of die, right? But your quality of life was kind of like peak. Now we kind of like live and then your quality of life just, people are living longer, but their quality of life is, they're in hospice or whatever. They're just being kind of prolonging their time. Like what have you seen in your research through all this?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that are really important. So, Peter talks about this medicine 2.0 versus medicine 3.0. So in medicine 2.0, we focus on treating disease. In medicine 3.0, which is what he's focused on and what we're focused on, it's about prevention of disease. Because once you have a chronic disease, once you have cancer, once you have heart disease, yes, there are things you can do to mitigate it, but you're on more of a downward trend and your quality of life can really be impacted. And I hear this from a lot of people, Ken, is like, oh, I don't want to live longer. And I understand that perspective because the viewpoint is living longer means longer time in decline.
Yeah, yeah.
But the reality is the longer you live, the faster you die. What I mean by that is that for the most part, people who live the longest lives, into the late 90s and even, to 100 centenarians, they die actually faster. And so they keep their quality of life up until the end. And the reason for that is because they delay the onset of these chronic disease. They're still getting heart disease and dementia and diabetes. It's later. And so if you have a heart attack when you're 100, you're more likely to die very quickly, as sort of morbid as that may sound, than if you do when you're 60 and our system keeps you alive for another 20 years in poor health. And so there's this view that I have to pick. Do I want, sort of my vitality or do I want to live longer and decline? But the reality is, if you focus on your health span, your lifespan will increase, but also this is one of the things Peter talks about, then the decline will be faster, which is what most people want.
Sure. Now, talk a little bit about how much of this is predetermined from genetics, right? Like, I guess that's part of the entire case study of like getting an appropriate understanding of what you look like inside and out, right? But like, do people get those studies and it's like insurmountable, or is it the sooner you get it, you can actually make some corrective impacts on even genetic health? I mean, you mentioned your own kind of family history and so on.
Yeah, so most people would say that genetics are a very small percentage of your health span in your lifespan of living to your 80s and 90s. So, I seen as low as like 7%, but let's call it 15 to 20% will is going to determine, can you make it to 90?
Mhm.
If but the longest lived people on earth, people who live to over 100, that then is sort of flipped. So people would say that's like 80 to 90% genetics. But what is within your control is health span for sure. And then, sort of your lifespan as it relates to, do you make it to 80 and 90 versus do you make it to 120? Probably not unless you have the right genetics or unless there's new therapies that come out, between now and then, which is very possible. But, we're not banking on that.
Yeah. So as you've been kind of like targeting your audience, right? I mean, you even have a kind of billionaire bundle on the website, right? Like, how are you, targeting customers? Is it for everybody? Is there entry level? Like, longevity is something I'm sure you're trying to make accessible for a
Yeah.
bars
What
people.
my goal, beyond your podcast, on that content on, LinkedIn and Twitter, and we have a newsletter, is to make this information accessible to everyone because ultimately The things that help you live longer and healthier don't have to cost much money. The things with the most proof, exercise, sleep, caloric balance, relationships, purpose, minimize stress, like that's not some expensive, gene editing technology that, you have to spend 100 grand for. And even Brian Johnson, who's a billionaire who's spending, $2 million a year on his health and living longer, he will tell you the keys to longevity are all of the things that I just described. Those are the 6 things that are most important. And so that doesn't have to cost that much money. We have a program called the Billionaire Bundle, which essentially sort of makes it easier for you to do it, right? So we include all the testing. We do, more extensive testing than sort of standard. And then we have a support team we call a personal longevity board that manages it for you and helps you to implement it. And that's, it's really about making it easier. And then we do have a cheaper program that's like a one-time check-in where, we do a subset of the testing and then we give you a plan. But long term, we're building an AI tool that will make this accessible to everyone. And, ultimately, like I said earlier, the real problem that I think exists in the market is there's too much noise. There are too many solutions out there trying to, tell you what to do. And what people need is customized personal advice that can help them sort through all of that. And that's what you can deliver through technology at a very, very low cost.
Interesting. So talk about your day-to-day, how it's changed 5 years ago to today, right? Like you were doing CrossFit. Are you doing all your own customized workouts? Is it 3 days a week? Is it 5 days a week? How's your sleep? How are you impact? How has your day-to-day changed?
Yeah. So my own protocol has changed a lot, but actually I don't spend more time or more money on what I'm doing. So yeah. So when I was doing CrossFit for 10 years, I made a lot of gains in the first 18 months building muscle. But then it was just sort of maintenance. So now I am still lifting weights 3 days a week, but I have far more specificity in trying to achieve my goals, right? And so that makes a huge difference in terms of the results. So I went from like above average muscle mass to elite. And it wasn't by working out more, it was just by working out different. And the same with VO2 max, right? Like I can run a marathon, but I'm not doing interval training. And without the interval training, it's harder to achieve my goals. So that's really was the shift there. And then the same with diet. So my diet is actually more flexible today than it ever has been.
I,
You know,
I saw you post about that recently, and I love that, right? Like, 'cause it's like people are obsessed with like, oh, it's just the diet. It's kind of like you can do a lot to have a little bit more flexibility on the diet side.
it's around the specificity of my goals, right? So my goal, to build more muscle mass means that I have to eat a lot of protein.
Sure.
Well, I target about 150 grams of protein a day. And then I also, for overall health, target about 50 grams of fiber. And so you can't, and I'm trying to be within a caloric budget of around 2,500 calories a day. And so in order to do that, I can't eat a lot of junk, but I can eat some.
Yeah.
I can have a cookie or a pancake or ice cream or whatever. I just can't have only that, right? So, having that sort of balance makes it way more sustainable. It doesn't create the same level of mental energy like if you're on a keto diet and, you're sort of really focused on like I'm only eating these things. Um and it actually is more effective at helping me achieve my goals.
Yeah. So talk. Let's get back to the American healthcare system, right? I just feel like it's just maybe not designed around longevity. I mean, as somebody who kind of spent some time early in our careers dealing with public policy and so on, do you have now kind of an agenda that you think policymakers in DC, we have a lot of DC folks listening, and what should Washington be doing to improve longevity for Americans?
Yeah, so I think there are things that we can be doing that can help to support this. And I think the problem with the US healthcare system is that it's focused on treatment instead of prevention. And part of the reason for that is a financial incentive, right? Because that's what you get paid for. That's what is reimbursed by both Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurers. And so the way to change that, actually, it's not some monumental, huge. We gotta like rethink our whole system. We just have to change what gets reimbursed, right? So if for example, and I know that there have been some proposals around this, is like we spend, the vast majority of our healthcare dollars are spent on treating chronic disease. What if we spend half let's call it like $6,500 a year per person on prevention.
Hmm.
What would that do? Now, the implementation is going to be very challenging. Like, how do you figure out what's the right thing to do? But like, just that one shift in thinking can have a dramatic impact on, oh, now like your gym membership and these additional testings and screenings that you're doing and like rethinking all of those things to prevent chronic disease has a huge impact in terms of being able to actually yield better results. And I think, ultimately, the government's like half the healthcare system, right? In
Right.
Medicare and Medicaid, it's about half, maybe a little less. But the private insurers don't have the same incentive for prevention because most of these chronic disease end up becoming Medicare's problem.
Mhm.
But the good news is because some people would say, well, because we don't have a single payer system, it's we're less likely to have, sort of a focus on prevention. But actually, we do have a single payer system for later in life when all of these issues come up, and
Yeah.
so, which is Medicare. And so,
In there one way or the other. Yeah.
yeah, so the government actually does have huge incentive to prevent all of these chronic diseases. And if we sort of shifted to focus on that, it would have a huge impact.
Hmm.
Second thing I just want to mention because I think it's really, really important as it relates to, particularly slowing down the aging process. So there's a lot of things we already know, and then there's a ton of money and research going into, trying to slow down the aging process, right? And to developing therapies that can actually achieve that. And one thing that would be very beneficial is if we had biomarkers of aging that the FDA recognize. So, for example, once we, sort of recognize some of the causal nature of cholesterol in heart disease, that then drove this, sort of innovation of new therapies that could drive down, particularly your LDL. We focus more on ApoB now, but that drove therapies that could drive down these biomarkers versus having to wait for the event to happen. And in the longevity space, because we're talking about lifespan and health span,
Mhm.
it takes a very long time to test something and prove it. So if we can get these biomarkers, that can have a huge impact.
Oh, that's true. Okay. Yeah, because you're right. Like how you have to measure this over time and you have to kind of have your own benchmarks of success and so on. Yeah. Talk a little bit about your exposure to stress and the impact of stress on an overall longevity plan.
Yeah. I mean, look, stress, relationships, purpose, mean these things all impact your longevity. I think the challenge is that, well, there's a lot you can do,
Hmm.
but it's not as straightforward. And so we spend a lot of time in our practice talking to patients about the impact of stress. Sleep is, sort of a huge component. Sometimes stress drives worse sleep. It also can drive, worse behaviors and things that, can impact your longevity. But the difference is like with, if I'm trying to improve, your physical health, I can design a specific program for you. Whereas for stress, it's a lot more individualized. But it is critically important. We know that. We know that stress can take years off of your life. And I think it's just important for people to recognize that and to understand, what they can do about it. Because a lot of times it's not actually the stress itself, it's the body's response, the stress response to whatever has happened in your life. And so one interesting fact is that there was a whole study of centenarians, people who lived to be 100 years old, and one of the studies was on Ashkenazi Jews, many of whom were Holocaust survivors. And the you'd think, well, they had this huge stress in their life, and one of the things is that that huge stress meant that things later in life were not so stressful.
Puts it in perspective.
Yeah, you have this perspective, right? So the stress response, and this is individualized, and some of it's genetic. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but you have a lot more control over your body's response, the stress response, maybe than to the stressors themselves. And so that can be trained, and people can
Sure.
learn. It's not easy, but with a dedicated focus and practice, you can do it.
So putting longevity aside for a second, let's get back to kind of Jesse, CEO, founder, business guy, right? Like let's talk about what it's been like building a team, kind of creating your own validation in the market out there. Like what's this journey been like for you?
It has been so much fun, Ken. I've been, this is my third startup.
Yeah,
You were, knew me around the time of the first one,
yeah,
right? So that was the beginning. And this one, it's a personal passion of mine. It's something that I'm, really committed to. And I have built a team, of people who are aligned with what we're doing. We're delivering care for patients, which has just been really gratifying. And I'm not a doctor. I hadn't worked in the space. I had a passion. I jumped into it. I found a doctor, who wanted to go on this journey with me as my co-founder, and then now we got three doctors on the team as well as some other clinicians.
nice. And you're taking full advantage of AI and technology. Obviously, you have a technology background, and you're in the Bay Area, right? So, has that been something that's kind of coincided at the same time as your growth, right? I feel like this AI explosion is kind of happening at a similar time. You're grabbing it at the right moment and using it in the right way.
Yeah. So the thing that I really wanted was to ground our AI in clinical practice. And initially, the idea was, okay, we can make this accessible to everyone by building, technology that can automate the process that can help you figure out what's right for you. And I thought that, what we would need to do that was just like get a few hundred patients in the practice, and we gather data, and then we use that data to train the models. Actually, what turned out to be the case is that it's not just the data, but also the process, a process that we go through that then the AI replicates. So that is part of the training for AI, is both the data and the process. And so, yeah, we have been building that. And, but I want to deliver something that is of real value. And I think that one of the sort of, for better or worse, in this space, people who are your early adopters are deep into it. So they really know their stuff. Right. So I've seen some of the AI stuff that has come out around longevity, and it's more basic. And the thing that, which makes sense, because the things that are most important, as I mentioned, are the basics.
Yeah.
So you have to be like advanced with the
Yeah.
basics, which is actually really hard. And so that's why, sort of my view is that to build the best technology, we want an actual clinical practice to underpin it so that we can deliver clinical grade recommendations.
Yeah. So real quick, there's concierge medicine popping up, there's patients first and all these kind of like healthcare, walk-in places. Are there going to be longevity clinics and facilities like emerging around America? Is this a strictly kind of, virtual digital thing? I mean, what's the future? I almost wonder, like, is there a confluence of kind of like your working out, your medical, your longevity, like a one-stop shop kind of thing in the future?
Yeah, so there are. I mean, Equinox actually and Lifetime Fitness, they both
Yeah.
have longevity programs that are like $40,000. I think, and there are clinics out there, and they're just very expensive. And so, ultimately, like physical clinics, we operate a virtual model, which does bring down the cost. But I still believe like the place where there's a real gap in the market is in customized, unbiased personal advice.
Yeah.
The problem with even some of the clinics, is that they're getting paid to do treatments, right? So if you have a clinic and you what you're selling is like injections for something, or peptides or whatever it is, then your incentive is to convince people that they need that, and some people do, and some people could really benefit from it. But what we're really focused on, and where I think there's just such a gap right now, is in helping people to sort through all of the things that are out there. And there's only going to be more.
Sure.
Right? There's thousands of different places you can go right now if you're into longevity. From supplements to ice bath to full body MRI, and all of these have their place
Yeah.
as part of a strategy, not the focus of it. And where people need help is in developing the strategy, and that's where
Yep.
there really isn't a solution out there. And maybe others will come along, but I really haven't seen that anyone tackle that.
Yeah, I know. It sounds like you're spot on. Last thing before I let you go, I mean, daily adjustments, right? Like you're not drinking coffee after 10 a.m. apparently
Yeah,
anymore.
so I know this is coffee with Ken. I this is my daughter made this. So I told Ken, I said, I can't have coffee after 10 a.m. And a part of it is that I'm actually a slow metabolizer of caffeine. But that's not, I don't tell everybody don't drink coffee. I drink decaf after 10 a.m. Sorry.
Deal.
Well, you just,
Deal.
so in order to optimize my sleep, I did about 20 different experiments. One of most optimizing caffeine, optimizing, sort of phone use, devices, light, the temperature. So I tried different supplements. None of them really worked. There were only a few things that really impacted my sleep. And one of them is caffeine.
Hmm.
So because I'm a slow metabolizer of caffeine, so I have only actually I do half
Sure.
half caffeine, half decaf in the morning, usually around 8:30. And on some days, like on the weekends, usually I don't have any caffeine. I feel the difference at 8 p.m. whether or not I had a half a cup of coffee at 8 a.m. or not.
Really?
And yeah, and like my wife can have a cup of coffee at 3 p.m. and it doesn't impact her.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really an individualized thing. You got to do these experiments. And so that was one. The other, I just go through them because I just to so devices for me was triggering. So even an Apple Watch, wearing an Apple Watch while I sleep impacted my sleep. So I stopped wearing the Apple Watch. I have a Whoop, which does measure my sleep. My phone, not only do I not look at it before I go to bed, I keep it in another room. It is programmed to go off, so I can't even use it. But also when I wake up in the morning, I don't look at it first thing because my brain was sort of wired to think, oh, I'm going to get up, and so I would wake up earlier or my sleep wasn't as good early in the morning. And so I don't look at it for 30 minutes in the morning. I have a cooling pad on my bed to, sort of optimize temperature and 100% blackout shades for each sleep blackout in my room. And those are the four things that, sort of were the most impactful for me.
And obviously late night cocktails, not like the good old days anymore. You
Yeah, so alcohol definitely, I have, maybe a drink once a month or so, for a special occasion. Certainly, if you have a drink earlier, it's usually going to impact people less. So definitely not having a nightcap. So, if I have a glass of wine, in happy hour or at dinner at 6 o'clock or something. But if I go to a late, I don't even eat very late usually. But if I do,
well, as I'm sleeping at 9:30.
yeah, I wouldn't be, having late night cocktails. Definitely are not gonna.
Amazing. Well, look, Jesse, I think it's just so remarkable what you've kind of put together in a short period of time. I mean, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, you were on one track, and this is where you are now. And clearly, not only are you doing a great job at it, but it clearly brings you so much joy. I mean, you look so good on this podcast compared to me. I need to get my longevity in order. But I'm really grateful you could join us today and then talk a little bit about it. It's amazing.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, it's been great catching up with you and to chat about all of this.
This is amazing. And I appreciate everyone tuning in. It's coffeewithken.com. You can follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and catch up on past episodes. So until next time, thanks so much, Jesse. Good to see you.
You too.